Warning. The following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, night, whatever time you're watching this, whatever you are, welcome back to Whisper the Insights. Getting tired of that disclaimer, but my producers don't let me take it off because they say that I said some bad words once in a while, which is not true. I said them very often. But my name is Esteban. This is still Whisper Insights, a show where the best conversations with the smartest people happen, and we get, whatever you can get out of it that will help you make better decisions in your life. Before we get started with today's shows, a couple things. Should I don't remember who's next? Oh, yeah. So next week is going to be fun. February 6th, Lauren Vargas. Did I get that wrong? Hold up. That was last week. Let's try that again. Good morning. Next week, we have John Reed. And we're going to be having an incredibly good conversation that I'll tell you as soon as I find out the topic in my calendar. And then after that, we're going to have Lauren Vargas and Trishan Wang that are going to be talking, having a great conversation as well. And we have some really good guests going forward. So we are live today, and I cannot find this thing. I should be better prepared, I think. But let me try this again. I don't know what we're talking about, but it's going to be a great conversation with Jonathan Reed, and I'm going to get better organized next time, and I will have all this stuff before we get started. So now that I fumbled the opening, which is usually the start of a great show, I want to say welcome. Thank you for being here, and let's start again. The show today is going to be fantastic, and the reason for that is because my guest is fantastic. My guess is he's going to do his own intro because I don't want to destroy his reputation, but he's one of the people that I respect the most that I made in my life. Not only has he done a terrific job in all the jobs that he has done, but every conversation I have with him, whether it's professional or personal, it just lets me to believe that he is one of the greatest people that I ever met in my life. So with that intro, and he's going to tell you more about what he does, here is the CEO of the San Jose Sharks, Mr. Jonathan Becher.
Hey, Jonathan, Esteban, how you doing? Don't you know rule number one, which is you need to give me a lower bar for entry. I can't possibly live up to that introduction. That's too much over the top.
Here's the problem. The things that actually are respected the most for, I cannot disclose because they're covering the fiduciary duties of our previous employment. So
Fair enough. Okay, Esteban, happy to do so.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on Whispered Insights. I do have one question, though. Yeah. Do we need to whisper the whole time, or can we talk at normal volume?
No, let's talk in normal volume. I haven't whispered a day since I was 12,
Fair enough. So, yes, I would never call you the whispering type. That doesn't fit your profile.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So anyways, welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for being here. Why don't you give us a quick 30-second refresher of all the wonderful things you've done in your life and what brought you here?
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks, Esteban. And appreciate you having me on the show. I'm maybe a strange character and odd to be on the show because you introduced me officially as CEO and president of a sports team, which I am, but that's an unlikely journey. I started out my life as a programmer, built a whole variety of programs. My first thing I did was built a compiler of all things. Back when programming language was the hottest thing in Silicon Valley. And by luck, I built 3 different startups, 2 of which was acquired, one of which that went public. My last startup, all those were in the analytics space. So I'm a data and analytics guy by background, which is going to be one of the main themes for our program. Mm-hmm. My last startup, a company called Pilot Software that did analytics and dashboards, got acquired by SAP, which is where, Esteban, you and I met. I remember when I first joined SAP, I went from a company that had about 100 people to one that had 30,000, lots of culture shock. Especially since I grew up in a town that had less than 35,000 people of it when I was a little kid. I ended up lasting almost exactly a decade at SAP, had a whole variety of jobs, including chief marketing officer and chief digital officer.
Let's say the first chief digital officer among all the large vendors also.
I think I was given that title, the first chief digital officer, at least in the Fortune 5,000 or something like that.
Yep.
About 5.5 years ago, I decided I was tired of flying around the world. think someone told me I did 2 million miles in 7 years, and took some time off. And my old boss, Hasso Plattner, the founder of SAP, gave me or one of the 4 co-founders, gave me a call. And now I'm running Shark Sports and Entertainment, 2 professional sports teams, a 18,000 seat arena with concerts and family shows, 9 recreational ice rinks, and a nonprofit foundation. But we're here really to talk more about data and maybe the difference between B2B and B2C.
There you go. That's what we're going to talk about. So quick question. What year was it that you did this compiler? Do you remember?
What year did I write my first compiler? In 1993.
Okay, cool. So we come from similar backgrounds. I was writing compilers also in the mid to late 80s when I first started with linguistic symbolism and AI, which is still AI, you know. So
the same thing. I like to say I started in Lisp and symbolics as well. That was what I did in grad school.
That's what I was going to. Yeah, I mean, you're one of the OG people on AI, but we're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about a couple other things. So, the reason that I started thinking about talking to you about data, despite all your lengthy, time in there, is that you and I had a conversation one time at a dinner where you told me how you decided to look at data from a different perspective than the rest of the world. I don't know if you remember the details, exactly, but you were. This was during COVID, and you were capturing data from consumers, and I thought that it was fantastic. But before we get into that story, let me ask you a really simple question: what's the biggest problem with data today? The title of the show is like, what are we going to do with all the data? So obviously we have data, but what's the biggest problem that we have today with all this data and everything available?
Yeah. So look. Most people you talk to will spend lots of time talking about, insights or AI, because everyone wants to talk about AI right now, which I promise I won't get on too much of a tirade. I might at some point during this conversation.
Phil, we had a disclaimer. You can say whatever you want here. Nothing you say will be taken seriously.
I did see the disclaimer. I can drop some AI bombs or something.
There you go.
You remember what people used to talk about greenwashing? Now we're doing a lot of AI washing now, I think.
Exactly.
Well.
Yeah.
But I think by and large, but in my opinion, by far, the biggest issue is data illiteracy. We are collecting tons of data more than ever before. We're spending all this time cleansing it. We're throwing high-priced algorithms out. We're hiring really advanced statistical people, calling them AI people. We're creating lots of insights. 99.9% of them are not actionable, but we just don't have basic competence in most of our organizations on what data is really about and what it means and what it doesn't mean. And I think unless we go back and re-educate the general population about what data is and what it isn't, most of these things won't have much impact. And I mean, the simplest example hasn't really changed in the 25 plus years we've been around. Maybe are we now close to 30 years? I don't really remember anymore. But I would guess, and I have not done a survey, but just informally, I would guess 90% of employees still don't understand the distinction between correlation and cause.
That's always fascinated me because I mean, we both have data training, obviously, right? I mean, we came here through data, so statistically speaking, we're probably more advanced in the training that a lot of the people that we talk to that either didn't have the statistic training or the data training, or they just don't remember. But the thing that I never understood is how can you confuse causation and correlation? I mean, one is prior, the other one is post, right? I mean,
but this is the problem. I think, and maybe this is just being in the technology industry for so long. We certain things we take for granted that I think the vast majority of employees never get exposed to. And I remember the wake up call I had actually was at university, because I'm not sure I really understood correlation versus causation. And, I'd shake my head when people would say it and smile. But I think because we're a storytelling culture, we need simpler stories for people to understand the difference between the two. And Esteban, these stories are not for you and I. So I got a couple of stories I want to walk you through, if you will. The one I remember from when I was younger was there was I won't say what university I went to, but you can probably look it up on LinkedIn. The statistic professor I took it said, how many of you have woken up on a Sunday morning with a headache? We're all 18, 19, 20, whatever. Most of them raise their hands. And they say, were you wearing the clothes that you wore when you went to bed? And then, of course, most of us raise our hands again. And the answer is, okay, clearly waking up with clothes on is correlating with headaches. So probably if you go to sleep with your clothes on, you'll have a headache, right? And that's the causation, right? I have a headache. It must be because I slept in my clothes. But obviously the answer isn't really because you slept in your clothes. It's because you probably had a little bit too much to drink the night before. So you didn't bother taking your clothes off and doing whatever else. And that's what caused the headache. And that kind of memorable, is it the going to bed with clothes on, et cetera, as a, whatever I was, 20-year-old, sticks with me. And I think we need to find those simpler examples to get people to understand. And I have a bunch of those, if you will.
Well, so here's the thing that always kills me, right? So Time Magazine did an article on data literacy and the digital decade about 3, 4, 5 years ago. I can't remember, maybe 2 years ago.
Was that
And
before or after Benioff bought them? Oh no, not.
It was after Mr. Benioff decided to buy them, but I don't think that he has any input on the editorial direction. But that's a whole different conversation. Yeah, but they did this article, and what they did is they used as an example. This is a lot more political, but I have no political affiliation in this comment. But they basically said Elon Musk made, after he bought Twitter, he basically one of his first tweets is like, to say how most of the crimes are committed by Black people against white people or something like that. And when they look at the correlation of the causation part, what they did is say, and this is the part that kills me more than what you described, is the fact, like, the statement didn't take into consideration the number of white people, the number of Black people, the number of Hispanics, and then it said, like, compare one population to the other one if they were equal. And of course, if you have 10 people and 3 committed a crime, there's 30% of them. If you have 100 people and 3 committed crimes, 3% of them. So 30% is bigger than 3%, right? And this is my problem. It's like people don't understand that data is not data. It's how it's presented and how it's used. And my biggest problem with data literacy is actually willful or acknowledge illiteracy, which is like, I know that this is wrong, but this proves my point. So I'm going to actually make it work this way, right? Yeah. And that's another problem that is big.
Yeah, there is an old joke in the analytics crowd that if we torture the data long enough, it'll prove any hypothesis that we want, right?
That's right. And but that's my problem with data literacy more than anything. It's like it's not like they have trained and they have not trained. So they has the knowledge or don't have the knowledge. It's the people that actually understand the data and they willfully become illiterate about the data so they can prove their point. And I think that's my biggest problem, the way the data is being used today in corporations, which is like, we'll go find the data that proves the point and then we'll use it and we'll use it to justify. And not because we have data, then everything's okay, right?
So let's come back to that in a minute. But before I get to the conspiracy theory that you're headed to, which is we're doing this intentionally.
I don't do conspiracy theories, man.
I think it creeps into our natural consciousness as well. I mean, the other one. So you've heard, and I'm sure everybody listening to this and listen to it later knows breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And it turns out that's a causation, we believe, which is based on a very loose correlation. So if you actually go back to the 80s, it was the 70s and the 80s, as I recall, there were a series of studies that eating breakfast was correlated with success in elementary school. And so the popular wisdom was, if you ate breakfast, if you didn't skip it, then you'd be a better learner. But in fact, nobody went back and looked at the data, which people have since then. This is not me figuring this out, but this is me rereading the studies. It said, well, if you didn't eat breakfast, the students that didn't eat breakfast were more likely to be absent to the classes entirely or tardy, which in turn turned into poor performance. So in fact, eating breakfast only helped the malnourished students perform better. It didn't help those that were already well nourished. And so, to use a statistic metaphor, nobody ever tests the null hypothesis. They didn't take breakfast away from people that were well-fed. They only gave breakfast to people that were not well-fed. And I think that's generally what's missing in our discourse, come back to you, which is when somebody shows you a correlation and claims it's cause, what we generally need to do is try to disprove the opposite of what they're trying to prove. Because if you can't also disprove the you don't really know if you have causation. You only know if you have correlation.
But so let's take it one step further into the enterprise. I mean, Is that possible to do in an enterprise environment? I mean, we're both business people that we've been
We are.
around the enterprise
Yeah.
for a while. So is this possible to do in an organization, in business, in an enterprise? Can you take the time or the effort to tackle both? Or do you just go with the data that you found and, everybody happy?
Well, I mean, if you're asking me what organizations do, the vast majority of them see some interesting potential insight and then they run with it until it's proven that it doesn't work. But of
Yeah.
course, in a more well-considered environment, particularly in the economic environment you are now, it's worth testing. I look, again, I'll use another classic example. So remember the beer and diapers example of,
Mhm.
which everyone explained, it said, oh yeah, men, particularly newly married men, were sent to, this is ridiculous, particularly in this day and age, but this is the story we told ourselves for 20 years in analytics. We're sent to the store to buy diapers for their newborn kids. They were so overwhelmed, they bought beers for themselves.
Yeah.
And regardless of whether that's true or not, which lots of people claim is, and other people prove that it's not, and that doesn't matter. My question is, let's say it's true. What the heck do you do about it? Because action is more important than insight. It's more important than data. And what I've always told people is if you think that's true, and if you're a 7-Eleven and your goal is to get people in and out of the store as fast as possible, then of course your answer is put the beer next to the diapers.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're Walmart, and no offense to Walmart, it's probably true at Target and anybody else, I just happened to work at Walmart for part of my career, then your answer is put them as far as part of possible, because really what you want is people stuck in the retail chain, wandering the aisles, looking for the beer after he bought the diapers, because maybe they'll buy 5 other things as well and fill up their shopping cart. So to me, the correlation, regardless of what the causation, is less important than what you're going to do about it. And that's where I think testing is the single most important thing you can do.
But those are two great examples because, I mean, again, not picking on anybody particular, but like in your examples, the data becomes irrelevant because
That's right.
So then, is data really what we should be using to justify everything we do? Or is data just like, a crutch that we use to justify the things that we don't know how to do or that we don't know whether we should do?
Well, so this is where it comes back to humans. And in fact, I guess until the robots take over, it's always going to come back to humans as well. Honestly, I'm not as apocalyptic as most people. I don't think the robots actually take back, but whatever. Well, that's yet another conversation we can actually have. See, it all comes back to AI, doesn't it? One way or another. But here, so the approach I recommend is start with a hypothesis. Don't start with the data. Here's the problem I'm trying to solve.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go in this direction. And then what I typically do is look for the data that will disprove the hypothesis that we already have. Because if we can find the data that disproves the hypothesis, that we can stop that hypothesis and not test it right away. But sorry, were you saying something, Esteban?
No, I said okay. Yep.
So if I believe that the price of a good I have is cost sensitive, right? Therefore, I don't want to raise price. But if I lower it, I'll sell more. Let's look for data that reinforces, but not reinforces that, because that's the confirmation bias, but rather look for something that disproves it. Unfortunately, I find that most people in the analytics are doing the reverse. They're just mining data, looking for patterns. And when they find a pattern, they jump on it and say, now how can we take advantage of that? And what you don't know is that a pattern that's more of a one-off, or is that a pattern that's repeatable? And so that's why I want to start with the business problem that you're solving.
Okay, so let's try to put an example behind this because we can talk about this stuff forever. But let's pick a business problem and analyze it from that perspective. I don't know if you have one or if you don't that you're dealing with, right now. But
do you want to pick one? You can challenge me if you'd like.
Go ahead. No. I won't challenge you. I know you can do this. Let's pick one that that for real life that you recently used where like data became irrelevant because it was a business decision that didn't require data, right?
So my favorite example is churn. So in any kind of SaaS membership model, we obsess on things like customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, and churn in particular. And as you know, there are dozens of companies out there that have built advanced analytical models to predict churn. And there's a ton of data that say things like, if there are too many calls into the call center in the first N weeks after a go live, that will predict churn at the end of the first year or at the end of the thing. There are others that say if you don't get enough input from the customer, that means that they're not using it enough, and there's usage. You're familiar with all these companies,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
one of their CEOs. And my answer is, so what? Let's say you can predict churn with 100% accuracy. What are you going to do about it? Is the answer reduce the price of the renewal? Is the answer send the executive out on the corporate jet to sit with the decision maker? Is the answer build a better product? There's no action tied to any of these. The data is irrelevant. And so you ought to be asking yourself a very different question, which is, what can I as a company or an individual do to increase the probability that this person or this company renews their product at the end of the month? So let me give you an example in sports, because I don't want to pick on any of my SaaS friends, etc. So membership for a sports company, for football or baseball or hockey for me, etc., is essentially SaaS. You sign up for a year, you get a certain number of games. At the end of the year, you choose to renew, or maybe you expand. You try to get new customers. The same thing. And we build lots of likelihood to renew models. And it turns out ticket use and forwarding is indicative. It's correlated, not causation, with whether you renew. But there's no action model. And so instead of asking, we just ask questions. Are you likely to renew or not? If not, why? And then just go to the simple, okay, these are the top 3 reasons. Let's just knock them off one by one. And if it's, I can't afford it, great. We'll give you a moratorium on ticket price. If it's the, I don't feel valued, okay, give them a VIP experience. If it's I can't use all the tickets I have, then institute a ticket trade program. So it's no longer an analytics problem about what's the probability, 91.3% of the person renewal not. It's a next likely action model of what do I do about dissatisfaction.
But then do you need data for that? I mean,
you do, but instead of terabytes worth of data, you need small pieces of data, which can often come from simple survey forms.
So you're not really looking to create a model that determines exactly why people are going to renew or not renew. You're looking to find the little piece of information that said this is why they renewed, and that's all I care about.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Because one is actionable in a short amount of time. The other one is a nice science experiment.
So can I take the devil's advocate side on this and say, then you don't need data really, because that data already exists. So there's no need for analytics or AI or anything like that. I mean, predictability, and I agree with you, predictability is useless. Prescriptability, which is multiple path and statistically valid path and everything, is kind of like useless. Patterns are not going to repeat themselves all the time, right? I mean, they're going to be close, but not exactly the same. So then all you need to know all these people renew, what's the common pattern that they all renew, the one thing that they all renew, and then you go after that, right? I mean, using this example.
Yes, except for, and I think you know this intrinsically, so thanks for trying to set me up here, which is...
I'm just having a conversation. There are no, I promise you, there's no hidden agenda there. I mean, if you think I'm stupid, go ahead and say it. I'm totally in favor of that.
So I think there's a concept in my head that I keep all the time, which I call ditch to ditch, which is right now, I think, unfortunately, and look, I love analytics. I did 3 startups for analytics my entire, but we've over-indexed on analytics, and we're entirely focused on that's the only way, and forgotten that humans are ultimately irrational, and we make decisions that are often outside the norms. We're unpredictable. And so I'm pushing towards the other ditch to say we don't need all this data all the time. We need to understand the human side of it as well. The answer is probably somewhere in the middle. The combination of the two gives us much better insights. So I don't agree with we don't need data at all. We just need to be less obsessed about it. Now, let me give you a simple example. Human behavior changed fundamentally during the pandemic. And what we thought we knew about why people wanted to come to live events and why they didn't clearly fundamentally changed with the advent of COVID. What we don't know is the willingness to come back and be in an environment didn't turn back on overnight. It went through the population in a non-even way. Some people were willing to come back and be shoulder to shoulder to the brethren relatively quickly. Others are a long tail. Even now, we have a large fraction of our former customer base that are not comfortable sitting in an environment with 8,000 screaming fans as well. Can we really survey 600-ish thousand active fans and get down to the individual person? No. We can use data to figure out some basic things, which is there are some ethnographics of subpopulations that are willing to come back more quickly. You might imagine age is highly correlated with willingness to come back to live events as well. It turns out the further you live from our venue, the more likely you're craving the in-person experience. So the more likely you're willing to drive. It's reversed from what you would have guessed as well. So data can show you patterns that defy your normal expectancy when things move quickly in quickly moving environments. So I do think we need both to make sure we remove our biases, because we have all these intrinsic biases.
Let me take a couple of the comments. I mean, Alan said prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future, which I agree. But he's asking the real question: is that part of the analytics problem? And I think that one of the problems we came to analytics is that we actually conflated predictability and analytics. Analytics is much more powerful than just predictability. But like with everything else, it's easy to explain analytics if we say it's predictability versus if we say it's optimization or it's prescriptability or whatever. But is that really part of the analytics problem, that like we just make it about only one part that is, infrequently right at best?
So let's be fair again. I don't have any. What's the old joke? 67.3% of all statistics are made up on the fly in order to reinforce a statement you're making.
It's actually 72.1%, but sure.
Oh yes, but I was talking about a different subpopulation than you were talking about. But yeah.
There you go.
Which goes back to data definitions, which we haven't talked about because everyone has different data definitions. But
yeah,
informally, I would say something like 75 or 80% of what we generally call analytics are backwards looking. They're not forward looking. Maybe even higher in some things. And finding patterns in past data is useful to explain behavior you've already seen, but does not always in fact, usually doesn't do a very good job predicting what will happen next. It's just like Wall Street has tried to teach us for the last 50 years, which is past behavior does not guarantee future results as well. Just because your stock price has gone up, in fact, because revision to the mean often means that it's on so there it is, 87%. So what I would say is most predictive decisions are foolhardy.
Yeah.
And what really is to give you hints of where things might go, but there are very few examples of lights out prediction that have turned out to be valuable enough. I get it. The entire ad placement world is going to yell at me right now because they're based entirely on you're most likely to buy this product or not. But
But let me do a little recap and then we get to that part, because that's actually a pretty interesting part of this. So far we said the whole world is data literate for the most part, if we're going to be nice and fair. And part of the problem is like, we reduce the value of data to simple things like predictability and analytics and simple analytics, which they never proven to do a good job. So we'd be better off focusing on smaller models of data and looking for the data that we need to actually test different things versus making decisions. Did I get that right?
You got that right. Maybe one other thing I'd say is because our definitions are not consistent, most of these models are meaningless. So let me just give you a simple example. People are confused by what sales and revenue is. One of my favorite examples, because I used to do a lot of e-commerce in my former life, is let's say, Esteban, you go onto my retail store and you purchase something and then return it. Are you still a customer or not? At one retailer, you're a customer because you purchased something. At another retailer, you're not a customer because you don't own anything. Now, go ahead.
There's a third part, which is like, I don't care because I have your email and your phone number. I'm going to bombard you with shit until you come back and buy something else. So I don't care if you're a customer or not. It doesn't matter to me.
Right? Yeah, but what if they're reporting number of customers to the street? Should they report you or not? Now, are you a sale but not revenue because they returned it? Yeah. What about the number of transactions? Did it get incremented by one and then decremented because you returned it? Now, what if they refund the price, but you have to pay to ship it back? What does that have to do with? Is that a zero margin transaction because you paid them money to ship it back, but they didn't take it? So all these are inconsistent.
Yeah.
And it means retailer 1 versus retailer 2, the same analytics can't possibly work. And so back to data literacy, unless we define our terms really closely, we don't really understand how to interpret any of these models.
And that's the part that I wanted to focus a little bit more, because we discussed this a couple of times and you and I talked about it before. I mean, how do you define something in terms of data? I mean, there's data. There's so much fucking data, man. I got terabytes and petabytes, and we create like, what is it, like 5 petabytes a day of like noise, which some people call data, right? Or more by now. So what is data? How do you define something in terms of data?
The reality is the old joke about pornography applies here, which is you cannot define it, but you know it when you see it. Because everything and nothing is data. And once everything and nothing is data, I mean, this show is data, right? Yeah. We're capturing how many people are watching live versus how many people watch the recording versus how many people will then forward it to a friend, all that is data. And you, as the Whispered Insight host, may want to understand that data. And the gestures I'm using could be data around engagement and stuff like that. And when I roll my eyes at you because I don't like the question, that's data as well. So there is no definition of data because there's exhaust coming from this data everywhere. The reality is, I don't know, 99.9999% of it is noise. Yeah. And the real super trick is to figure out how to extract the few bits that you really care about. And, we're very much of a brag culture, we just as a society. And so we like to talk about the petabytes of data we capture. And my question all the time is, how much do you actually use? Right. And, when people are honest, it's much less than 1%. And so I ask the question, so why are you paying to warehouse or data mart or whatever your favorite term is, data that you never intend to actually use? And the answer is because I might need it one day. And my answer is usually, well, by the time you need it, the data you've stored is probably irrelevant. So again, go back to what are the few problems you're trying to solve? What are you trying to optimize? And only worry about capturing as little noise as you can around that data.
It's fascinating because back when I did advisory, that I'm starting to do again, shameless plug. Back when I did advisory, one of my favorite things was to go to executive teams and say like, okay, how do you define your customer? And they have all these definitions. Oh, somebody, like I said, somebody who bought and then returned, somebody who had 2 purchases. I said, okay, how do you define your customer using the data that you have? And they're like, oh, we have so much data, there's nothing we can do about it. And then I said the same thing that he just said. Why do you store all that data? Why don't you just get down to understanding the piece of data that you need and capture and use it and throw it away? I mean, if you don't need it, you can throw it away. The value of the result is much higher than the value of the stored data, right?
Exactly right. In fact, that's the math that I would encourage people to do, which is understand those 2 values. You're exactly right, which is if the value of the result is only 3 or 4 times higher than data, then store more data. But in most situations, the value result is 10, 20, 100, 1,000 times more. And so just don't store as much data. Narrow it down.
Yeah.
Wait, I see
Alan said this about 10 minutes ago, and I was trying to find the right place to put it. But this is exactly what we're talking about. I mean, if you're not going to do anything with it, there's no point in keeping the data. If there's no action, then it's irrelevant. If it's irrelevant, then why store it? I'm working right now with a startup talking about AI and trying to define a definition of data for them, because everybody wants to find data the right way. And this is the problem that I'm finding. It's like, do you find data in terms of the outcome or in terms of the value of the data? I mean, anyway, you were going to say something.
No, so I agree with Alan. I just would flip the problem on its head. Don't say if there's no action, don't store the data. Just start with what actions you are trying to take or not take, and then find the data that will tell you whether to take that action or not. If you start with the outcome rather than start with the data, you're going to much better situation. The problem is we've built an industry that's data first as opposed to action first.
Yeah. and there's another comment from Alan. It's a collection of power supplies, which we all have. As soon as I throw one out, I realize that I'm going to need it, right? So then you got to go hunt for a new one. But still, I mean.
But I buy earthquake insurance even though I'm not in an earthquake zone. So it's just in case.
You're in California, dude. You're gonna end up in the bottom of the ocean either way. So, Anyways, but I find this thing interesting. I think the concept of defining data or defining elements and outcomes by data. I mean, we had this conversation before where you told me this story about how you guys started doing I think it was cash cards or something similar. I don't know what the term was during the COVID era, right? Can you tell that story a little bit? I mean,
Yeah,
whatever you feel comfortable with. And again, if you don't want to, that's fine. But
no, I can tell most of the story. So if you roll back to COVID, particularly when nobody knew anything about anything, and we, remember the days we were wiping down our grocery and leaving the mail in the garages or whatever for days on end? Because fine. What a different time it is than now. But
I don't need my radiation equipment in my garage to irradiate my groceries anymore. Yes.
Yes, it was an interesting time. We'll leave that alone. But during those times, live events. I'm in the business of putting on live events, not just hockey, but concerts and etc. One of the things that we said is we need to reduce the number of interactions between humans, because interaction between humans was viewed as a bad thing societal. By the way, 3 years later, now everyone craves interaction from humans. It's very interesting how these things go. So if you look around at interactions in humans and live events, one of the points of interaction is when you pay for what you do. I mean, there's a interaction where you order, and people kind of figure that one out, but there's an interaction between when you pay. And one of the things that slows interactions out when you pay is exchange of cash, because cash is just hard. You pick the dollar bills or the 20s or whatever, find change, et cetera. So we said, we should go cashless, solve that problem. So then I stopped and I said, pause. Okay, that before we go cashless, let's run this process out 4 or 5 extra steps. First of all, what are we going to do about people that only have cash? Because there's a whole segment of society, even here in Northern California, that prefers cash as the way to do it. Interesting. Well, we need a solution for them. So we'll come to that in a moment. I said, second, if we're going to go to digital transactions only, we're going to have a whole bunch of more data. So before we go collect all that data, let's theorize what we could do with the data that we might collect. We haven't collected even a single bit of data as well. All right, so those are the 2 questions we asked ourselves. So the first thing we realized is we said, maybe there's a problem we can solve of helping people that only have cash get digital payments. So we built a reverse ATM. Well, we didn't build it, but we partnered with somebody to build a reverse ATM. So reverse ATM is exactly what it sounds like. An ATM, normally you put in your debit card and cash comes out. A reverse ATM is you put your cash in and now a card comes out. But in this case, we said, the debit card that comes out should be Sharks branded. And it shouldn't just be a debit card that works in our arena, but should be a real debit card that works anywhere that people go. And what we said is normally there's a 3 or 2.5% transaction. There's a little screen there that says, by the way, if you opt in, we'll pay the 3% fee for you and we'll use your data anonymously. So what happens is people go in, they put their $100 in the machine. They now have $100 on their debit card. They might use $60 of it in our arena. Then they go grocery shopping or whatever they do. Now we have data, not just of what the purchase behavior in the arena, but purchase behavior anywhere in that. We're now in their wallet. You know, the old retail term of share of wallet. I've now got a peek into consumer behavior, not just in my arena, but whatever else they do. Okay, but great. Who cares? Why store all that data? Well, now I can go to a partner and here's where I'll hesitate because I don't want to call out, but I'll say, I can go to a CPG manufacturer and their arch rival and say, turns out, yes, you're not in our venue, but I actually can show that our fans prefer you over the one that's in our venue because they're buying your arch enemy in my venue. But when they go back home where they have freedom to buy anything that's on the store shelves, they're buying the arch enemy. So you ought to pay me a lot of money to get into my venue because that's what my fans prove. And that kind of data, that exhaust, comes from the simple problem of want to reduce friction during COVID.
There's so many reasons I love this, but the number one reason is like you actually said you tackled 2 problems, right? One was the fact that you needed to provide a digital means of payment, but you didn't just stop there. You didn't look at that and said, okay, we should solve this and we're done. You said there's data associated with this, and there's data that could be valuable for many different reasons. So let's find a way to track that data in a way that makes sense. And you're not the first person to track data. Let's call them Facebook or Google or Netscape even if you want to, right? But I mean, so the thing is like but you figure that there's a way to actually use that data for something more than just solve the issue at hand and actually create a whole different issue. This is, to me, was the most important, interesting part of that concept. And not to mention that
I got a cool little card that's hanging out in your wallet. So now I got branding up as well. So
yeah. No, but the best part about it to me is like, the people that come to the stadium with cash. I'm living in Placer County. I know cash people.
Yep.
They're all around me. I live on where Placer County is. It's on the way to the mountains, right? So yeah, so people around here all use cash. Very few people would use ATMs. But no, you have a person that used to use cash that uses an ATM everywhere, not just at the Shark Stadium.
That's right.
And now you created a new consumer, and this is what I want to talk about to you next. Now you create a new consumer that didn't exist before, that is trackable where it wasn't before. That is fucking genius. So that to me is genius.
So
the rest, yeah.
So the question then becomes, what business am I actually in? Am I in the business of putting on live events, or am I in the business of tracking consumer behavior? I don't know yet. This is the interesting experiment.
And it goes to what you were saying, actually, and also as a way of a summary. Figure out what the problem is. Don't create a hypothesis, create a problem statement, figure out what you're trying to solve, and then look for the ways you can solve it. Hopefully think outside of the box and look at the data that comes out of that could be useful in as many iterations as possible, because one-to-one with data is absolutely useless. You're going to end up with like terabytes of data that is repeated and repetitive, and you have 6 addresses. I mean, I used to, since Sears is mostly out of business, I can use their name now, but at one point I bought something from Sears and I called them for service, and they said, are you still in like North Carolina? And I'm like, I never fucking lived in North Carolina. Oh, we have an address for you for North Carolina. Exactly. And I'm like, from when? They're like, oh, this was in 1993. Like, I'm going like, oh my God, I actually worked in a consulting gig for like 9 months in North Carolina, and I had actually literally had a phone number that was created, and somebody created the record, and now Sears has access to it, right? But what's the point of having all that data versus having the data that you need? Go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's not, but you're exactly on a point, which is, I suspect if most of us were honest about our data stores, 90+% of the data in the data stores is stale or irrelevant to the business problems we have now. That Sears data about you is not only is it not useful, it's actually worse. It's sending false signals. And so we spend as much energy getting rid of data as we do collecting data, recognizing that the save it because you might need it one day, by the time you try to use it, it's so out of date that it's actually sending you bad signals, not good signals.
Yeah. So I mean, again, before we get into the last part of the show, and unfortunately I had to keep this to an hour because I haven't convinced anybody that I got to do more than an hour, but we'll have you back because there's a couple of things I want to talk about. But so far we said become literate about the data, but then become literate about your business problem and correlate. Sorry, bad use of that word. and relate the problem to the data that you're going to capture, and then relate the value that you get from the data, and then then you get to what Alan says. What business are you in? That's the most important question. And how does the data relate to this business? And then this is the part that I think that I know you want to talk about B2B versus B2C, and I'd love to talk about that, but we'll do that next time, because I want to get to actually Alan created a much better question, which is how do you know when or how to retire data then, right? This is a dynamic show, so we're going to talk about B2B, B2C. Let's change that. Let's talk about retiring data and getting rid of data that you don't need anymore. I think that's a more relevant question here. So how do you know when the data is worthless, useless, or needs to be retired or disposed or whatever at that point?
So I have a evolving theory, which I will admit is not yet well designed, but it's interesting that just like
is this going to be your next startup, by the way, or not yet? No,
might be. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Just like there is customer lifetime value, there is data lifetime value as well. And there is elements of data who are long-lived in their value, and there's elements of data which is short-lived in their value. And the inspiration around this comes from a story I think all of us have experienced at some point in our lives, which is we go to some well-known e-commerce site. Let's just call it Amazon because that's the one that everyone uses generically. They've got, 20 years of history of my purchase. My sister has a new kid, let's say, and I start buying baby items for them because I'm the uncle. And then suddenly they think I have kids and all they want to do is spam me with kid things as well. But I never then buy anything else again. It takes them forever because they are focused on frequency, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a situation where data is useful to be long-lived because it's unlikely that my 20 years of pattern is suddenly changing and then because I never had kids and that I'm going to suddenly be interested in baby stuff, right? So in that case, the data you have around the psychographics, the demographics of me is unlikely to fundamental change, and you should keep that forever, basically.
Okay. And by the way, speaking of Amazon profiles, there's a computer somewhere scratching its head looking at my purchase history, just so you know. But there's no pattern here, dude. This guy buys whatever. But
there are other things that are associated with more impulse oriented.
Okay.
And impulse oriented things tend to change quite frequently, and that data I don't expunge at all. So let me give you an example from my world. In fact. Well, I'll give you one from my world, or we can pick it there, which is whether you prefer to come to games or events or concerts on a weekday or weekend is a long-lived phenomenon. It is unlikely, although it does suddenly happen, that or someone that's only ever gone to a weekend event suddenly comes to Tuesday. And those are highly correlated with you live in Stockton or Sacramento or something, and it's just easier to drive down to San Jose than it is during the midweek. However, food preferences are highly dynamic. It turns out people buy tacos on one day and hot dogs on the next day and sushi on another day as well. And so storing 20 years of food purchase behavior is foolhardy. You can find lots of pattern there, but then predicting what people are going to buy next is almost ridiculous at the individual level, but works at the aggregate. So I can tell you what food is becoming much more popular in general, but trying to predict whether Esteban is going to buy sushi versus tacos next Tuesday isn't worth the effort.
Okay, I agree with that.
I can also say on the north side of our concourse, I should have more basic staples. And on the south side of our concourse, I should have more cultural staples. That kind of trends work really well. Pricing, however, pricing of weekend games is lower than pricing of weekend games. If it's going to rain, you would think, oh, people are less likely to drive. No, because I'm an indoor activity. People don't want to be outside. So I can actually raise prices if I know about weather. So there are things I can do at aggregate where I store data a long time. What I do during Sundays when it's football season, football is a bigger drive in the US than hockey is. Prices should be lower. Once the local sports team quits playing, then there are no Sunday competitors and prices go up as well. So aggregate things like this live forever. Impulse things live for a short amount of time.
So how do you differentiate between the two of them? I mean, how does Amazon decide to look at my profile and look in like 1996 when I bought the first book and say that it has no relevance to anything else? When in reality, if you look at that book and like 6 others that I bought, it's the only thing that remained constant in my profile. It's like, the topic of that I did for that book. How do you make those decisions?
So first of all, you should test. But in general, you start with what problem you're trying to solve. Yeah. Is the problem you're trying to solve is how do I figure out what categories from Amazon's 700 business categories I should display on the top tab so you'll see them? Or is the problem that I'm trying to do is figure out what price, because everyone gets a slightly different price when they go to Amazon. Oh, did I say that out loud? I
don't know what you're talking about, man. The prices are set in stone. They never change.
Okay, yes, the prices are set in stone. If you say so.
Thank you. Don't blow the secrets, okay?
Wait, I thought this was whispered insights. We're supposed to blow all the secrets. That's the point.
Yeah, and the airplane, the airlines charge the same price no matter who comes to buy the ticket. That's also another secret that everybody knows.
So in my opinion, I don't work at Amazon, so I can say this. It's been 15 years since 20 years since I consulted at Amazon. So anything I knew back in the year 2000 and 2001 is now irrelevant. I hope that's data they haven't actually kept. That they want share of your wallet. they should care less that you always buy books from them, and more about what categories are you currently not buying for them that you might based on your thing. Yeah. So their history should be, can I get him to buy pharmacy stuff for me? Should I get him to buy clothing from me? Looks like you buy Amazon clothes. Can I get them to buy prescription sunglasses? Well, to them, because they are driven by, unfortunately, Wall Street, they want to know how much of your overall shopping behavior is happening on Amazon versus Walmart versus Target, whatever you call it as well. To them, it's less about what you already buy and it's more about what you could potentially buy. And that's the data they should be storing.
And how do you make, you're solving the problem, but how do you make the decision what data actually gives you that information so that you determine whether you need to store it or not?
Start with a very simple analysis of people that, let's say they have 700 lines of businesses. I don't know what the number is now.
That's fine, yeah.
Look at those folks that are already using those 700, not all 700, but a large fraction of them, and find out what they have in common. Run the analysis, look backwards and say, is there a certain demographics? Is there a certain pattern? And then just do a test. Do lookalike analysis and say, here's Esteban. He looks like that, as far as we can tell based on this data, and try to provoke that behavior. If that doesn't work, that's not data worth keeping. And so you keep provoking the behavior and see if you get a response that you want.
The whole purpose of doing digitize everything and doing analytics is not to do that anymore. This is the way that things have been done forever. I have an 18-year-old that lives in Northern California that buys filters for the refrigerator. So therefore, every 18-year-old who lives in Northern California will buy filters for the refrigerator, right?
No, that's
okay.
So that's what's different. It's not that everywhere will be. That's a test that I should see whether you as an 18-year-old exhibit this behavior or not, or are you more likely influenced by the fact that Taylor Swift bought a advertised filters for your refrigerator?
Very interesting.
So you're looking for the stimulus that works for you, and you create a hypothesis as well. So it's not the it's the, is this an interesting one for you or not? That's the big difference in the last 20 years.
So then we go back to where we started, in the last few minutes, which is like, with that data literacy, that's not very easy to do.
That's exactly right. That is the fundamental problem. Because without data literacy, you think every 18-year-old's the same.
Right.
With data literacy, then you go, here are some interesting things I test on this 18-year-old, and I figure out which ones actually matter because they're causation versus they're just correlated.
Are there enough data literate people in the world to make a difference in the way we conduct business?
I don't think so.
Okay.
If I was waving the Esteban magic insight, then I
can't believe that he managed to get Taylor Swift into my show, by the way, just so we're clear.
We can do that. We can work on that. If I was waving my magic wand, I would be dramatically investing both at the high school and the college, university level on data insight more than advanced analytics.
So I started in computers in 1984 because at the time, when we got past plastics as the only word, computers became the only word. Not everybody knows what that means, but that's fine. So in 1984, I got my first computer. In 1982, I read an encyclopedia of computer that told me everything I needed to know about computers, and I haven't actually updated my knowledge since then because it's very simple. Ones and zeros, and they do what they're told. What else do you need to know? If you're a logical person, you go from there. But so then, but look at that was in 1984, and look at how long it took for computers to become both predominant and widespread and ubiquitous in society and enterprise. We're talking late 90s, if not early 2000s, before we had computers everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So that's a 25 year cycle. We don't have 25 years of data illiterate people to go.
You mean we don't have 25 years to wait, is what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, yes. Sorry. Semantics matter, yes.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yes, semantics do indeed matter.
Yeah.
We don't have much choice. You can't hurry it up. That's the problem. Everyone wants revolutions. The reality is there are very few revolutions. And even most of the revolutions, the groundwork was set 10, 15, 20 years at a time. But the problem is if you don't start, you never get there.
So do you think that in the post-digital age that we're living, we're we used to say digital, if you don't do everything digital, you'll die, your company will go out of business, and then COVID happened, and COVID showed that it's not a 1 or 0 proposition, right?
Correct.
So now that we're living the post-digital age and living the transformation that AI and intelligence is going to bring into the organization, I mean, do you think these things are going to go faster than they did back in the 80s and 90s with
Well,
computers?
there's only one rule, and that is change always happens more quickly. No question about that.
Okay.
Come on, I could probably find a keynote that I gave in the late 90s or early 2000s where I said change is happening faster than any point in human history. That keynote that anybody has given, you can give every year, and it'll always be true. Every year we're going to produce more data than we did the year before. Every year change is going to happen more quick. All these truisms are true. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because change itself is not what we're trying to do. Collecting data itself is not trying to do. We're trying to have impact, and real impact does not happen overnight. Unfortunately, true impact takes longer than anybody wants.
Okay. So to wrap up before we get to the last,
to use the old metaphor, we overestimate change in the short term, and we underestimate change in the medium term.
Yeah. Let's take the last question from Alan before we get into the wrapping part. Critical thinking correlates to data insights. We cannot use the word correlation, but let's pretend that he didn't. But
critical thinking is very similar to understanding data literacy. It is. We have in fact, we could just change everything we said for the last hour and say we have a huge lack of critical thinking in the world today.
All right. So then we teach. So then to finish the segment, we teach critical thinking and data literacy in schools so that people who look at the problem understand how to test the solutions for the problem.
Indeed. And then we wouldn't fall prey for all the social media tricks that happen out there as well, because we'd be able to say, is this really true? Deep fakes would be easier to detect. I mean, there's just so many problems that critical thinking and data literacy would solve.
Yeah. There you go. All these reasons are true by Jonathan Becher. We're gonna make t-shirts with that. All the reasons are true. So I think this was fascinating.
Alan, we can't say that's true until we test the null hypothesis and see whether there are any falses that are also false.
You're going too scientific for the crowd here, dude.
Okay.
Like, but there's not. What's a null hypothesis? No, I'm kidding. I always said that in 95% of my strategy engagements, the preferred action should always be do nothing, because we cannot afford to do whatever you want to do. But hey, let's pretend and let's try, which is going to be much more fun.
You just proved my change conversation. Change is going to happen, but 95% of the time, people don't want to change. So there you go.
I could say something about a certain company we both know, but I won't say anything, because then I wouldn't be able to wrap up by saying data literacy matters. Understand the problem you're trying to solve. Don't worry about the data. The data will be there once you understand the problem.
Exactly.
And then educate people on critical thinking and data knowledge so we can do this. Now, we got 2 minutes, which is perfect time for the last segment, which is, what questions do you have for me? Or what something that I missed or anything that we didn't cover in this conversation?
I think we skirted around it, but I'll come back to it, which is, when you're doing your optimization internally, which is a bigger cost to you, solving one problem well or attempting to solve 100 problems poorly? And if you're capturing data just to attempt to solve 100 problems poorly, ask yourself if that's the right for your business.
I'm thinking, because honestly, I could make the case for either one. But if I'm going to not flip a coin, I would say I'm a little more inclined to solving one problem well. I'm on the record saying one time that we know how to solve all these problems. We just don't know how to solve the problems. We know the answer. We just don't know how to implement them, right? So and then to wrap up the show in the last few seconds here, my friend Brent Leary, who decided not to join us to be producing the show, thank you, Brent, had something that I have no idea what it means, because I have no idea who Eric Dickerson is. But I assume that this is for you, so you guys can talk about it.
It is for me. I get the joke. I will. I'm laughing at you, Brent. Well said. So
okay. And then the final comment from Alan before we break away. If you're really good at one thing, that's a lot. And again, I don't know who Daisy Prince is. I don't know what you guys do in your free time, but apparently know what I do, because my life is dedicated these days to learning how to play poker better. So
So Esteban, maybe a tip of the hat to your next guest. When you have John Reed on, ask him about his shoes and tell him I asked the question. See what he says.
Okay, I'd be happy to ask him that. With that, wrapping up the place. Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back and talk about B2B, B2C, and like talk about whatever you want, because this is fantastic. I did mean what I said before, since I had the last word and you cannot say anything. You're truly one of the smartest people I know, and it's a pleasure to talk to you every single time. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Esteban.
And with that, we're going to get off stream, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye all.
One.